September 23rd, 9:30 in the morning. We have a nice fall day here in Boonville, and I'm going to continue my saga. So good morning. Continue my saga on teaching you why you should ignore the food pyramid. So this is class number 3 on a ketogenic way of eating. And so there was a new article that was published in this year from the British Medical Journal. Again, pretty much getting rid of the myth that a low-fat diet, which it's been shoved down our throats since 1978, 82, so 40 years, about protecting yourself from heart disease. Well, okay, so what we've got is a continuation of heart disease, still the leading cause of death in the United States. And now we have on top of that an upsurge epidemic of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So what I'm going to do is review this. I'm going to review an article from 2018, and then I'm going to also review an article that was published this year, which led to this particular class. So I put up a donut. I've been pulled over by police officers, and the joke about them going to the donut shop is actually kind of funny. But there are a significant number of police officers that I see around here that probably need to hear this little talk, or they need to call me as a health coach. Hey, Wendy. So what we're going to talk about is why you shouldn't eat that donut. And I've eaten plenty of them. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying never eat a donut. I'm just saying don't eat a bunch of donuts every day. So if you have high cholesterol, you've probably been told to reduce the saturated fat in your diet. So I'm going to show you why that's a stupid idea. Yeah, the donut picture was great. I love those. I just don't eat them. It's been a while since I've eaten them. Chocolate frosted donut, but oh my goodness, they're good. So even more horrifying, you go to the doctor, you got a high cholesterol, they say, well, you've got to reduce your saturated fat. Ooh, even more horrifying, you need to be on a statin drug. And so we talked in May. I did a 4-part series on why you should ignore your cholesterol and stay away from statins forever. So Lipitor, which came on the market in 1996, it's the single most profitable pharmaceutical medication in the history of the world. I think $129 billion of profit. It's still on the market. It's generic. It's cheap, but it isn't good for you. And it won't do anything to keep you from dying from heart disease. I proved that. I wrote about it. So I revisited this since there's this new article that came out. So listen up. This is important. Everything you've been told about eating in the last 40 to 42 years is incorrect. It's not right. It's not going to extend your life. Good morning, Christy. It is not going to reduce your heart disease. What it's going to do is make you gain weight, get insulin resistant, and perhaps wind up with type 2 diabetes, and then be on glyburide, metformin, glucophage, maybe even insulin. So a new study. We'll go over the new study at the end. So this is the British Medical Journal Evidence-Based Medicine. Found no evidence, no evidence to support the long-term recommendation of reducing saturated fat in your diet. So the study was reviewed by an international team of heart experts, including 5 cardiologists. Instead, they found out that cutting carbs, ketogenic eating, was a more effective way to reduce the risk of heart disease in people with high cholesterol. So you think about familial hypercholesterolemia. I'm one of them. A bunch of you are one of them. And the way to reduce your risk of heart disease is to severely reduce carbohydrate intake, if not eliminate it altogether. So I told you last week that the amount of carbohydrates that you need to ingest put in your mouth and eat and swallow to sustain your life is 0 grams. I told that to my students yesterday. 0 grams of carbohydrates. And your brain will work. You'll create the glucose that you need in your own body. The last thing really that you need in your diet is carbs. They're great. That donut speaks to me. I've eaten a bunch of them. That's my favorite donut, a chocolate frosted glazed donut. The problem is it'll cause you some trouble. So the reason is that people with a lot of high cholesterol also have trouble processing sugar. And we talked about the biochemistry of sugar and fructose and the high fructose corn syrup. And so processing sugar difficulties are called insulin resistance. So you may have it without even knowing it. So behind the scenes, foods like bread and muffins and sweets and chocolate frosted donuts are creating chaos inside your body. So insulin resistance can lead to metabolic syndrome. You get abnormal weight gain, specifically in the abdomen, higher blood pressure, and then lipid profiles that are not heart healthy. And we'll talk about lipid profiles a little bit down the road in this class, because the lipid panel that you're doing doesn't tell you the whole story. You can figure it out on your own. Most doctors will not order the correct lipid panel. They'll order the fasting lipid panel, but there is some information you can get out of that and calculate on your own how you're doing. Okay? If left unchecked, metabolic syndrome can turn into type 2 diabetes, and type 2 diabetes is the leading cause, well, not the leading, it's the 7th leading cause of death in the U.S. and complications of it, one of which is heart disease. In fact, it's now been shown that the worst way to reduce heart disease risk is by eating a low-fat diet, which has been crammed down our throats since George McGovern sat on that committee in 1978 that eventually developed the food pyramid published in 1992. So the best way to reduce heart disease risk is eating a low carbohydrate diet with higher natural fat and moderate protein in your foods. So how is it that we've heard to reduce fat in our diet for 40 years, and it's the least effective way to eat and prevent heart disease? Well, science leads us in the right direction. So the truth is that cholesterol really has no effect on arteries, which is why I wrote that article last November and talked about the fact that you should ignore your cholesterol level. Heart disease is caused by chronic inflammation of arterial walls that damages the arterial wall and then allows for a plaque formation to build up. Within the plaque, there is continuing inflammation because your body recognizes that as a problem, so it tries to attack it. So your body's continually fighting that that plaque formation, and that can lead to clot formation. So hypercoagulability is what that's called. So your tendency to form blood clots, if it's higher than usual from inflammation, that's called hypercoagulability. And heart attacks are caused by blood clots that occlude coronary arteries. They're not caused by cholesterol plaques. So what leads to chronic inflammation? So we've heard this: air pollution, smoking, alcohol, pesticides, stress, etc. I can go on, and most of these things you know are bad for you. But perhaps the most single common reason for chronic inflammation building up in your body, you're doing without even thinking about it, and it's the way you eat. The thing that we eat that causes the most inflammation in our bodies is simple carbohydrates in the form of sugar and high fructose corn syrup. So those two little problems are in almost all of the foods that are processed. So if you buy foods in boxes and cans, you can find added sugar and you can find high fructose corn syrup. They've gotten a little sneaky, and now they call high fructose corn syrup natural sugar, which it is. It's still fructose, and we talked about the biochemistry on Monday. So sugar Sucrose, natural sugars, complex carbohydrate sugars are not metabolized by the body in the same way. So sucrose or table sugar is a disaccharide, two molecules put together made up of glucose, which is the energy of life, and fructose, which is used in processing since it's cheaper and sweeter than sugar. So it was introduced into the market by Japan in 1975. So glucose, the energy of life, much of that is used in your brain. I proved to my physiology students a week and a half ago that your brain can run on ketones. 80% of the energy from your brain can run on ketones, which is the point of ketogenic diets. The rest is glucose, which can be endogenously within your body produced without eating it. Okay? So glucose is metabolized in the brain, fructose is not. Fructose has to be metabolized in the liver. We talked about that on Monday. So the details are not as important as the end products of fructose metabolism in the liver. So fructose is eventually turned into very low density lipoproteins and fatty acids. Very low density lipoproteins are turned into triglycerides. Triglycerides are what raise the risk of heart disease. So a low fat diet with carbs in it, specifically fructose, is really a high fat diet. Okay? So remember, LDL, low density lipoprotein, and HDL, high density lipoprotein, are cholesterol taxis. They are not cholesterol. So you keep hearing LDL is the bad cholesterol, HDL is the good cholesterol. Neither one of them are cholesterol, they're lipoproteins. Elevations of triglycerides can lead to heart disease, and elevated free fatty acid levels from fructose can lead to insulin resistance and the metabolic syndrome. The metabolic syndrome is also known as prediabetes. So the lipid panel and total cholesterol levels don't tell you a whole lot about your heart disease risk. So a better predictor is ratios and particle size. So you either have to order that yourself from a direct access lab. If you don't know how to do that, shoot me a messenger message or comment. I'll show you where to do it. I'll send you the direct link where you can order what you need. Okay, so a better predictor is the ratios. So you can take your lipid profile that your doctor ordered and you can calculate your own ratios. Quest Diagnostic Labs will do that, but you have to ask for it. You have to ask for a fasting lipid panel with ratios. They will do it. It's just a calculator. You got it on your phone. I'm sure they charge more for ratios, even though they're running the same test, really. So one of the ratios is total cholesterol to HDL ratio. So my health coaching clients, when we do a fasting lipid profile and apolipoprotein B and a lipoprotein A level, which we talked about a month ago, that's a better predictor for genetic risk of heart disease. Lipoprotein A. Most doctors haven't heard about it. You have to ask for it, or you have to order it yourself. So a total cholesterol to HDL ratio of less than 5 gives you an average risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay? If you're more than 5, that's an elevated or a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. Another ratio is triglyceride to HDL ratio. The closer to 1, so divide it, the better. So ideally you would have a triglyceride to HDL ratio of 1. So I've seen women, not men, but I've seen women with HDL levels of 115 and triglyceride levels of less than 100, so their ratio is less than 1. And women have lower risk of heart disease unless their lipoprotein A, little a, is higher. So total cholesterol levels, which is done in the malls and when they do, kind of health screens, they tell you your total cholesterol's over 200. That doesn't tell you anything. So in fact, this is from May when I did that class, total cholesterol level doesn't really tell you anything until statistically it approaches about 300. And ideally, for a person that's 60 years old or older, they have a lower risk of dying of heart disease if their total cholesterol is over 200. LDL needs to be less than 160, or around 160, I should say, less than 160. 160 is ideal. HDL greater than 50. Okay? So free fatty acid formation not only leads to insulin resistance overall, but the liver becomes unresponsive to insulin in the face of fructose metabolism. So all those little interactions lead to the production of reactive oxygen species, also known as free radicals. That's what most people know them as. And those reactive compounds are the source for chronic inflammation and disease. Okay, so let's go back to 2018. This is a study, it's a global study that shows carbohydrates, not fat, lead to heart disease. Okay, and we've talked about Ansel Keys in the seven country studies, which he refuted in 1997 before he died. He said we always knew that carbohydrates caused heart disease, not fat. So he lived to be 100. So my guess is he didn't follow his own deal, the research that he did. Okay. So this is a study of 150, it's called Global Correlates of Cardiovascular Risk, a comparison of 158 countries. Okay, the primary results: intake of high glycemic carbohydrates, particularly wheat, were most positively correlated with cardiovascular disease incidence and high blood pressure across all countries, 158 countries. Alcohol intake and sunflower oil, remember alcohol and fructose are the exact same thing metabolically. So you give your child a Coca-Cola and don't think about it, you wouldn't give them a beer, but it's the same thing. They metabolize the same way. So alcohol and sunflower oil were positively correlated with cardiovascular disease risk, but less so than simple sugars, carbohydrates. Total fat and animal protein intake were found to have a strong, not a moderate, a strong negative correlation with cardiovascular death risks, particularly in Europe. Okay, high blood pressure was most correlated with intakes of cereal and starch, specifically in women, however not found in Asian countries where the primary cereal grain is rice. So that leads to another thing. So if Asian people eat more rice, which is a carb, why do they have less cardiovascular disease? So people in Japan eat lots of rice, Asian countries, and they don't raise their cardiovascular risk until they move to the United States and start eating the standard American diet. In Europe, total fat and animal protein, so natural fats, was negatively correlated with high blood pressure. Completely different than what you've been told, right? The strongest correlation between elevated cholesterol and diet were found with animal fat and animal protein, followed by percent of calories from plant foods. So your cholesterol will go up, but I told you in May and wrote about it last November that total cholesterol levels really mean nothing. Those ratios are more important. So the single most correlative factor for cardiovascular death and obesity was elevated blood glucose levels, also with the consumption of grains, especially wheat. Okay? So the new study, so that's from 2018. That was a big 158 country study. So this newest study from 2020 in the British Medical Journal is called, and I'll put it up in the comments when I get done, Dietary Recommendations for Familial Hypercholesterolemia, an Evidence-Free Zone. Okay, so they talk about the Ansel keys, the historical perspective on the diet heart hypothesis and low fat. No evidence to support a low fat diet to reduce cardiovascular disease. So they go through all that. That's in their historical perspective. Let me get down to, there's a whole bunch of tables here, so let me get down to the actual summary. So dietary recommendations for coronary heart disease prevention in people with high cholesterol for the past, they said 8 decades, I'm talking about 4, focused on targeting serum cholesterol reduction with low saturated fat, low cholesterol diet, 55% carbs. These recommendations are based largely on the antiquated and evidence-free diet heart hypothesis. Low fat diets reduce heart disease death rates, and they don't. They've not changed in 40 some years in the United States. What we've got now is an epidemic of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes. So this paper is proposing a revision of dietary recommendations for elevated blood blood cholesterol based on substantial evidence that the subset of people with high cholesterol levels that develops cardiovascular disease exhibit risk factors, specifically enhanced thrombotic risk, so hypercoagulability, chronic inflammation, the tendency to form clots, and then a higher sensitivity to risk factors associated with an insulin-resistant phenotype, so that's genetics, elevated triglycerides, elevated blood glucose levels, elevated hemoglobin A1C levels, so diabetes is 6.5% on hemoglobin A1C, insulin resistance is 5.7 to 6.4% hemoglobin A1C levels, as well as abdominal obesity, so weight gain in the abdomen, hyperinsulinemia, which can be measured. You do a fasting insulin in the morning. If it's 20 or greater, you have a high insulin level, and you probably have insulin resistance. The other factors are high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is a measure of cardiac inflammation, a lower HDL level, less than 50, and then an elevated blood pressure level. Okay, so the key points of this study: current dietary guidelines for management of coronary heart disease risk and familial hypercholesterolemia are based on the diet heart hypothesis, which is outdated and unsupported. There's no support. They've done study after study. Low-fat diets actually raise your risk of heart disease. There's no evidence to support the recommendation that individuals with hypercholesterolemia should consume a low saturated fat, low cholesterol diet. Irrelevant. Doesn't mean anything. A low carbohydrate diet, ketogenic diet, significantly improves cardiovascular disease biomarkers, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin levels, okay, compared to a low fat diet. So, low carb, lower incidence of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and obesity. Low fat, higher risk of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. Okay, so they conclude that there's sufficient rationale for conducting clinical trials to determine this, although a lot of them have been done. It's that randomized, placebo-controlled thing, and nobody, who's going to spend a whole bunch of money on dietary risk factors? There's no drug involved. So extensive research from them, their conclusion, has documented that hypercoagulation, so the tendency to form blood clots, is a more important risk factor for coronary heart disease than low density lipoprotein levels in people with high cholesterol levels. Okay, so it's a fascinating little study. It just came out in 2020, and kind of continues to, I'm not going to say prove, but lend support to the article I wrote. Ignore your cholesterol levels, avoid statins, and eat natural fats. So low carb, so this is ketogenics. Low carb defined as 20 grams per day or less, with moderate protein and high natural fats. So if you want to do labs, hit me up. I'll show you how to do it. Or I'll get you an order that will run through your insurance. We'll do a good panel on you. There's a cardiovascular risk panel that we can do. Okay, so if you have high cholesterol, so if you've been told, ooh, you need to take a statin, or you're taking a statin and you have symptoms, get a hold of me. I will prove to you and coach you through the fact that you can get rid of that medication and you can lower your risk of heart disease, which is the whole point of taking Lipitor, etc., whatever, whichever one you're on. So if you want to know how to eat or how to protect your heart, give me a call, give me a message, send me an email, Brian J. Tracy, BryanJTreacymd @gmail.com. I'll send you a health history, I'll coach you, I'll get you labs, I'll show you what you need to do. I'll craft you a personalized plan. If I need to pull in my nutritionist, Tammy Crabtree, from Guthrie, Oklahoma, I'll do that as well. She's working with, I think, several of mine, where she does a really good meal plan, and she's not as carb intolerant as I am. I try to reduce them as much as I can. She might let you eat that chocolate glazed donut every once in a while, I'm guessing, if I'm reading her right. So share this out. I will put the link to the British Medical Journal article in when I get done, and I will see you Friday. So we finished. I did a 3-part series on ketogenic diet and lifestyle, keto lifestyle. I'll switch. I got another interesting thing I just ran across that I was asked by another health coach friend of mine from Central Missouri, and I actually didn't know that much about it, so I couldn't really guide her. She's a co-health coach, and so I researched it for her because she gave me that idea, and found some interesting things on how to balance your estrogen naturally and why that's important. Okay, so share this out. I'll put the link up to the article, and I will talk to you Friday morning at 9:30. Have a great day. Peace and health to you all, and I'll talk to you Friday. See you later. Bye.